we're not starting over from scratch because every experience is a learning experience. So we take something out of those tough seasons where we feel like we kind of fell off track and went off the rails, and we bring that into our next steps.
Welcome back to the Exam Room Nutrition Podcast. Did you miss me? Well, the last 2 weeks have been a true whirlwind, and I wasn't able to get an episode published last week. I shared about it in my newsletter, which you can sign up for, by the way, at examroomnutrition.com/sign up. But I sadly had to emergently put down my kitty due to a heart disease called hypertrophic cardiomyopathy. And on top of that, I moved last week. So it's been insane over here. So I apologize for my absence, but it is so good to be back in your ears today, friend. If you're new here, I'm Colleen Sloan. I'm a PA and dietitian, and today we're talking about something so many of our patients are stuck in right now: the exhausting cycle of starting over. Today, I'm chatting with a longtime friend, Sam Barone. She's a registered dietitian, certified specialist in obesity and weight management, and founder of Anchored Nutrition. And her perspective on this topic is deeply personal. After maintaining a 200-pound weight loss for nearly 2 decades, Sam has dedicated her career to helping women break free from all-or-nothing dieting and finally build habits they can maintain long-term. So in this conversation, we unpack why patients don't need more nutrition information, what they actually do need, the powerful mindset shift from starting over to simply resetting, how you can help patients uncover their real why behind weight loss goals, and the habits that actually predict long-term weight maintenance. And stick around until the end because Sam shares one of the simplest but most effective tools she uses to help patients stay consistent. And it's something you could start recommending today. All right, well, get comfy or drive safe and enjoy my conversation with Sam. Sam, I am so happy to have you back on the podcast. We were talking off air and I cannot believe it, but you were already a guest on the podcast in episode 5. It feels like so long ago, but I will link down to that conversation because it's actually a great topic. We talked about bariatric surgery way back then, but I'm really happy to have you back on the show. So welcome back, Sam.
Thank you so much for having me. I feel like the OG here.
You really are. So you've been with me for, almost 3 years actually of podcasting. So it's really cool. And I'm excited to unpack sort of a different topic. I mean, you are in the bariatric weight management space for a very long time, and you have a lot of cool experience personally as well that you can bring in with your patients. And so first of all, I want to unpack a question that I hear literally every day in clinic, and that's patients asking me, what is the best diet? So I would love to hear, how do you answer that?
Yes. So I just simply say the best diet is an overall healthy lifestyle that you're going to be able to sustain for the rest of your life. So essentially, no diet at all. I think that's really frustrating for people because everybody wants that magic answer. Here, do this, and we're going to be healthy forever. But unfortunately, it just doesn't work that way. So really no diet at all, just implementing an overall healthy lifestyle.
And I'm glad that you mentioned that they don't love that answer because
Never.
That's what I say too. Really, when you look at the literature, that is what the literature says as well, is any of the diets or dietary patterns is really the language I like to use, will work or help the patient achieve weight loss or better lab metrics. It's a matter of if they can stick to it and stay consistent. And I think that's the piece that is really hard for patients is like, oh, but I want to lose weight now,
Yes.
like yesterday. So I think that's a good, helpful reminder when patients are asking, like, what is the best diet, to really kind of flip that and say, let's talk about some of those habits that you can stick to long term, because that is what's going to help them be successful.
Exactly.
All right. So you have worked in both clinical and behavioral weight management. And I actually want to pause because that, even though we talked in the podcast a couple of years ago, episode 5, we've known each other longer than that.
Yes.
We've known each other when I was a clinical dietitian as well. We worked together in Palm Beach County. So it's really, really cool. Our history goes way, way back. But I would really like to hear now, with kind of your lens on both sides of the scope, clinical and outpatient weight management, where do you see the biggest disconnect between what we recommend as clinicians and what patients can actually sustain?
Yeah. And I think, in defense of the clinicians, you just don't have enough time to really put forth the effort. And so It's not necessarily that there are bad recommendations or approaches that are given. It's just that clinicians don't have the time to fully learn the nuances of that individual and teach them how to implement those things. So they just say, you know, well, you should probably lose weight, maybe try keto, or like, here's a printout of the diabetic diet or the cardiac diet. And the intention is beautiful. Of course, the intention is there to want to help the patient, but then the patient is looking at this paper going, well, I don't like any of those foods. I don't have time to cook. And none of this really seems like something that I can do. So, boop, and toss it aside. And then they end up frustrated, discouraged, and kind of back at square one. So, and it's not even really just doctors or PAs, also clinical dietitians are pressed for time. They have a little more wiggle room there to chat with patients, but not a whole lot. It's not, the clinical setting is just not really an ideal environment to truly help a person with a long term game plan for their overall health. So I think, the disconnect there is trying to give an easy answer of just, hey, here's this diet, as opposed to, you know, hey, we had this conversation about your eating habits and stuff. Maybe let's talk about one thing that you can start to work on. And then, of course, I'm going to throw this in there, refer to a dietitian so that they can kind of take over and work with them for the long term.
Oh, I love that response. And I say it all the time, like our patients do not lack information. We are in the information age thanks to AI. Most people know what is a healthy food, right? Intuitively, we do know that grapes are healthier than Skittles, right? So they don't really need help necessarily with like what to eat. And this is like where you were going. They need help with the application of that information. And that's where dietitians really, really thrive, not only because of the time, but because a lot of your training is in that counseling aspect, motivational interviewing. You really dig into that patient's life, their preferences. And that's why I think working with a dietitian is really, really helpful and can help the patient succeed. Now, I want to stop here and talk about the clinical dietitian because that's where a lot of dietitians start in their career. And that's where I started. And I was actually talking to another dietitian about that and how when you get a consult for like cardiac diet or diabetic diet inpatient, honestly, it's like kind of comical. Like we could probably
It's
spend
very comical.
5 minutes. I was thinking back to like when I was a clinical dietitian, I would print out a little cardiac diet packet, go to their room if the patient was sleeping or in the cath lab or doing an
There you
x-ray.
go.
Guess what I did? Yep. Drop it to the bedside, consult done. And we laugh at that. I'm not laughing because, of poor work, but it's the
Right.
reality of hospital medicine. It's unfortunately the reality of healthcare today. And I say that because for the clinicians listening, if you are an inpatient PA or hospitalist or anything like that, yes, you should still consult the dietitian, but just know they need far more support once they are home than they do and what they can get in a hospital.
And I think there's kind of a disconnect there, even in the dietitian world, in the hospital, because a lot of hospitals don't have any information for outpatient dietitians on hand. And so you're standing there, and if you're lucky, like you said, the person's actually awake and coherent enough to have a conversation with you. So you might give a little teaching, talk about something, but then they look at you like, well, who do I talk to next then? Like, where do I go from here? And a lot of times, and unfortunately, I have to say, when I was a clinical dietitian, I was guilty of this myself. You're just like, call your insurance. I don't know, ask, to find somebody in the area. So I think, it's a really good practice to find out what dietitians you have that are private practice or outpatient, dietitians in your area, and kind of have like a little list going so that if a person does have questions, at least you have something to give them that they can then reach out for that further information.
Yeah. And don't depend on their primary care provider because I
No,
promise you, they have no idea, you know?
none.
So you got to do your own work and kind of have that list. And I love that because the poor PCP probably doesn't know either, unfortunately.
Right.
All right, let's talk about the concept of starting over. And I hear this a lot from even my family members, and patients that I've worked with in the past. And it's this cycle of excitement to try a new plan or new medication, or, they had an aha moment. They're really gung ho. They start the thing and then it doesn't stick. And so they feel like they're caught in this cycle of constantly starting over again. So, do you see that, number one? And how do you help patients get out of that cycle?
I think the most important thing is that we are realistic and honest with ourselves. I hate to be the Debbie Downer, but like none of us are perfect. We're not going to be perfect. And when we're stopping and starting, and a patient is complaining that they feel like they're always in that cycle, that's a pretty clear indication that they're working in extremes and they are in that kind of all or nothing mentality, which is really detrimental to a long term plan because we don't have to be stopping and starting. We just have to kind of be like regrouping. And so instead of trying to change the world overnight and do everything all at once, we pick one thing, two at the very most to really focus on and get started. And then reframing it in the patient's mind as instead of completely starting over from scratch, we're just resetting. It implies more of like a course correction or an adjustment rather than like, here we are at ground zero again. And, can kind of give them that motivation because actually the reality is we're not starting over from scratch because every experience is a learning experience. So we take something out of those tough seasons where we feel like we kind of fell off track and went off the rails, and we bring that into our next steps.
I love the concept or that reframe of you are resetting, you're not restarting. And I think that phrase in and of itself is actually, it sounds motivational. It sounds optimistic. And I think patients really can kind of latch onto that because it also doesn't make me feel like a failure, right? That I'm
Mhm.
constantly having to restart because I couldn't stick to this plan. It's no, we're just resetting it. I love that, Sam, very much. All right. So what if a patient is stuck in that cycle of losing weight, regaining weight, losing weight, regaining weight? What is a question that you would encourage clinicians to ask that might help them get out of that cycle or just kind of think about things differently and shift the conversation?
Yeah, I love that. And I think it's pretty simple. For me, I personally and professionally, I think that bringing it back to just simply ask them what their why is behind it and why do they want to lose weight. And that can really bring up things that maybe they had never even said out loud before, never even really thought about it. I think when we get so caught up in wanting to see those numbers go down on the scale, we really forget what our North Star is in that journey because most people have more than just a surface level, I want to look good in a bikini reason to go on a weight loss journey. They may think that that's what it is, but deep down, they have a true, genuine, very profound reason why it's important for them to become healthier and to lose that weight. I hear a lot from new parents that are like, I have kids now. And so I want to be around long enough for them and be able to play with them and do all the things. So that is a really incredible, beautiful sentiment that can kind of get lost in the chaos of those weight loss efforts. So when you sort of bring them back to center and have them recommit to what that why is, it can really help them along the way and get more in the headspace of the course correction or resetting versus here we are starting all over again.
Yeah, I once had a guest on the podcast and she was saying that whenever she talks about goals with patients and most patients are like, "Oh, I want to lose X number of pounds." Or maybe they're like have this fantasy of being the same weight that they were in high school, right? So they want to
Mhm.
be back down to that number. Her response when they throw out, "I want to lose 50 pounds" is, "But why?" And then she keeps asking, but why? And she almost keeps asking till we unpack layer after layer after layer until we really get to that emotional almost trigger of like their real reason for why do you want to lose this weight? Because like you said, that is their real reason. That's going to be their motivating factor to stick with the plan, to stick with, working with you and to stay on this journey. So I love that concept of really unpacking their why. We're in such a weight loss focused society right now, I think thanks to the success of GLP-1s. However, how do we help patients think differently beyond just achieving that number on the scale?
Yeah, I think it's doing exactly that. Framing it to the patient as, hey, let's work on improving some of these lab markers, or let's talk about health and vitality of that individual, quality of life. Because the thing is, Colleen, we don't really want the specific number on the scale. We want to feel what we think that number is going to make us feel like. And that's really what we're striving after. And that's what we're going to achieve by focusing on our health and vitality, on adding in the things that are going to actually benefit our body as opposed to, just saying like, don't eat any of these things. You need to lose weight. So really making it for the patient about their health. And I know that this is kind of a buzzword now, but like the longevity of their lives, like sticking around for as long as possible, but not only sticking around, actually enjoying life and being able to feel strong and confident and all of those little things that get kind of overlooked when we're just like, I have to lose 50 pounds. So it may say on the referral, weight loss to the dietitian, but when speaking to the patient, if we can say, hey, I'd really love for you to work with a dietitian, talk to them. Maybe they can help you to really improve your overall health and vitality. And, what people don't realize is the more we focus on those things that are going to improve our health and vitality, the more the scale is going to keep up with that too. So our weight is going to actually, that's kind of like the happy byproduct of working on a healthy lifestyle.
Yeah, it's like weight loss is a side effect, right? Like a really beneficial side effect. And I'm actually really glad that medicine is kind of now focusing on the long term. I feel like we've had a very myopic view of weight loss, and it's like I just want to lose 30 pounds as fast as I can, where we are now realizing, number one, that's not sustainable. You're going to gain it back. Number two, at what cost, right? We are seeing some rapid weight loss, but if patients are not learning behavior change skills, coping mechanisms, and fueling other body systems and organs in 10, 20, 30 years, we could have issues like osteoporosis, like cognitive memory deficits. There could be a lot of long-term issues if you have not learned how to fuel your body properly and nourish it well. So I really like that we are now taking that far-sighted look and like wanting to say like, hey, who do you want to be when you're 60, 70, 80 years old? What kind of things do you still want to do? And like, that's the kind of education and support that I think we should help our patients really say like, yes, I know you want to lose the weight, but I think ultimately to have a life that you are thriving in your older years, that's really the ultimate goal. And I think the ultimate success.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. So I love learning from dietitians on my podcast. And since you do this day in and day out, and you really focus on the basic fundamentals of lifelong weight loss. And so tell us a few things that you share or what do you teach your patients, especially maybe I'm thinking if I have a new dietitian listening to the podcast or someone who's moving more into weight management, when you sit down with a client, what kind of things do you teach them or talk about?
I really focus on these 5 like core anchors that make up an overall healthy lifestyle, which of course is the nutrition aspect of it, including all of our eating behaviors, hydration status, our sleep hygiene, which I think is one of the most underrated pieces of a weight loss or health journey in general, our activity level, of course, and then stress management, which also includes like spiritual practices, which I'm really passionate about. bringing into the mix. Once we get those pieces into place, we're focusing on those things, people start to feel better. They feel more joy. And, as they're going, like everything starts working in the positive direction. And they do start to see those changes on the scale. But it's not necessarily about that. It's about, making sure that they are implementing those core fundamentals. Because I think, especially now, like how we were talking before with social media, and there's just so much information overload, we can really kind of like, what is that saying? Lose the forest for the trees. Like it's so focused on these like little rabbit holes about these tiny little details of things that, if you're not implementing the basics, it's not going to make any bit of difference in the long term, anyways. So we want to really just implement the basics so that as life be life and things happen, we're able to kind of just bring it all back to those basics.
Yeah, I'm a huge fan of basics and I like hate that I am. I hate that science is like so boring. I'm like, why can't the things we have to say that's evidence-based be flashier and sexier because the message would sell better, right? But
Right.
basics they do work. Now, I agree with you. I love talking about all of those pillars. How do you structure visits? Do you choose to talk about nutrition first, then sleep, then stress? Do you talk about them all at once? Because I know you are not a girl who overwhelms your patients. Do you ask them what they want to focus on? I just would like to kind of pick your brain on that.
Yeah, I would say both. So it totally depends on the person. And I have what I call a breakthrough session, which is that initial appointment. And that's where I really get to know kind of what the main issues are that they're dealing with and ultimately where they want to go with it. And then that helps me to know what the best sort of structure is. But also, you can't force a person to be ready to talk about sleep if they don't care about their sleep and they don't want to talk about it. So you kind of have to learn to really roll with the patient and what they're ready and willing to actually focus on and work on. So it totally depends on them.
Yeah. What do you do in the case where someone is really, really excited to get started on this journey and you, as the expert, can tell that they are probably stacking on too many changes or, overhauling too many things at one time, even if they're excited? Do you say, kind of put up the white flag and kind of give a warning, or are you like, hey, you know what, you want to try it? Let's go for it. How do you navigate that person?
So again, it will depend on them and their personality, but typically I would say, okay, let's try it your way. And, we'll do a week or 2 weeks. But then, if it's not working for them, then I tell them, like, listen, you've actually paid me money. So you've invested in this time with me. And I'm just asking you to trust me for a couple of weeks. If you don't like it, if you're not comfortable, if you feel like it's not helping, then we can certainly make adjustments. This is a relationship and we're working together to reach your goals. So, you got to trust in me a little bit to be able to kind of guide you in the right direction.
I'm sure your patients really do trust you, especially if you do let them go with the plan that they wanted, that they were excited about. I want to move into maintenance now. And I feel like this is where patients either kind of get lost in the medical world because they're kind of plugging right along, or they regain. So I would love to hear some of those habits or behaviors that patients do that you have seen that predict long-term weight maintenance, meaning they've kept that weight off. What are some of those things that patients are doing to be successful?
Yeah, absolutely. It's my favorite topic because I think when we go into a weight loss journey with the maintenance as the focus, it's a lot, I don't want to use the word easy, but it's a lot more manageable. I always joke with people that no, it's not easy to lose weight, but that's not the hard part. The hard part is actually maintaining it. We kind of talked about it before. When you're thinking of, I'm going on a diet or I'm in a period of, I'm trying to lose weight, that already implies a temporary situation. So what happens when you come off of that diet or you're no longer trying to lose weight? And that's where we all kind of trip up. And, in my own weight loss journey, it's funny because we now have the National Weight Control Registry that has this really cool list of the common denominators that successful maintainers are doing. And when I first read through that list, I'm like, huh, I learned the hard way on all of these things. But yes, this checks out. That's legit. And so it turns out, shockingly, that what most people do to maintain weight is maintain the things that they did to lose weight. But the most impactful, I think, the most beautiful thing that was one of those common denominators that the weight control registry showed us is that they're not trying to be perfect. They are acknowledging their slip ups, but they're addressing it as quickly as possible. And so they're not in the all or nothing mentality. They know that life is going to life and that they're going to go through tough seasons, but it's about how we respond to those tough seasons that makes all the difference in the world.
Yeah, I like that. It almost sounds like they don't get stuck in, you know, I blew it today, I'll try better tomorrow. And then tomorrow you blew it still. They kind of get out of it. And maybe it's 2 steps forward, 1 step back, but they're on that continual forward momentum. And so that's really interesting. And I like that it's sort of obvious, like the reasons why they've been able to maintain is like, yeah, because you just kept doing what you've been doing and what worked. You didn't make drastic changes. You kind of just keep plugging along. That's really interesting.
Yeah, it seems
Um,
like there's like a mystery surrounding how to maintain weight, but it's really not mysterious. It's just keeping on, keeping on.
okay, now for my final question, I wanted to give the listeners some strategies that maybe you use, but that you find are really effective to help patients move towards that sustainable weight loss. So we've got their why, we understand, but what are some really practical, actionable things that you have found help patients be really successful?
So, again, we kind of talked about it before, starting slow, not trying to change everything overnight, maybe help them pick one or two things that they can just start to focus on. Then always talking about addition versus subtraction because nobody wants to enter into a weight loss journey miserable, feeling like they're missing out on all their stuff, they're being deprived of everything. We want to just be adding in, and the more fruits and vegetables and lean proteins and whole grains, like those things that are going to actually be really beneficial to the body, the more that we add those in, just kind of naturally the other stuff starts to make its way out. And then my favorite, most practical, tactical thing to give a person is a habit tracker. It has been literally like a godsend to me in my own journey and to all of my clients because it is so simple. All you have to do is a little check mark at the end of the day if you did whatever that habit was. And just seeing all those little check marks continue to add up, you get super motivated. It keeps you accountable. And, it reinforces that reset versus, I messed up today and now it's all is gone.
I am a huge fan of check marks and to-do lists and things like that. It's so satisfying to check it off. And I think that's such a simple place to start. Like, I love that tip so much, Sam. So thank you for that. I always learn so much from you every time you're on the podcast. So if people want to connect with you online or work with you, where should we direct them to?
The first place, the main place would be on my podcast. It's called More Than a Number, and it's on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, anywhere you listen. That's probably the best place, or you can just email me at sam@theanchorednutrition.com.
I will link to all of that down below. So definitely get connected with Sam. But Sam, thank you so much for the gift of your time today.
Thank you.
All right, my friend, before you go, if what Sam shared about habit tracking had your wheels turning and you're thinking, wait a minute, my patients really do need this. I got you, friend. I created a behavior change toolkit for clinicians who want practical ways to help patients actually follow through with change and not just leave the visit motivated for 24 hours. Inside the toolkit, there's a patient behavior change workbook with habit trackers already built in, reflection exercises, goal setting tools, conversation prompts, and there's even 2 webinars by yours truly where I walk you through how to help patients navigate behavior change in real life. So if you're looking for guides, patient handouts, and strategies to make these conversations feel easier in the exam room, I'll link to the toolkit down below in the show notes for you. Well, thanks so much for carving out some time for nutrition today, and I will see you next week.